This album has been very warmly received.
Yeah, it has.
Were you surprised in any way by that?
No, I wouldn't have been surprised if it came and went.
Yeah.
When I'm working on something and I feel passionate about it.
They began singing together at age 11, but by adulthood, Paul Simon and Art Garfunkel could barely speak. The rift, more than artistic tension, it was deeply personal. Simon wrote the songs, but Garfunkel received the spotlight, and when resentment boiled over, Simon did the unthinkable. He erased Garfunkel's vocals from their comeback album and released it as a solo project. Yet that wasn't the real breaking point. Their story starts in 1953, when Simon first saw Garfunkel sing at a fourth-grade talent show in Queens. The two boys lived just blocks apart and bonded during a sixth-grade play of Alice in Wonderland, Paul as the White Rabbit, Art as the Cheshire Cat. Garfunkel admired Simon's wit and intelligence, and soon they were spending hours listening to rock and roll on the radio. They formed a street corner doo-wop group called the Peptones, refining their harmonies and performing at school events, gradually shaping the duo that would later captivate millions. In 1957, at just 15, they scraped together $25 to record Hey Schoolgirl at a Manhattan studio. A music promoter named Sid Prosen signed him to big records under the alias Tom and Jerry, and their song unexpectedly became a hit. Over 100,000 copies sold and a slot on American Bandstand. But follow-up singles flopped, and fame faded. What few knew was that the complex relationship had already begun to fray. In 1958, after high school, Simon went to Queens College for English, Garfunkel to Columbia for architecture. Still under contract, they used stage names, Tom Graff and Jerry Landis. But Simon secretly released a solo single, True or False, under a fake name, True Taylor, without telling Garfunkel. That betrayal cut deep and echoed for decades. Simon later admitted it still hurt, especially after Garfunkel once quipped, "No matter what happens, I'll always be taller than you." By 1963, folk music was replacing polished pop, and the two began quietly performing again in Greenwich Village under the names Kane and Gar. Everything changed when producer Tom Wilson, who was helping Bob Dylan go electric, spotted their act and got him a studio audition. There, they played The Sound of Silence, a haunting track Simon had written in a dark bathroom with the water running to create the right atmosphere. Columbia Records signed them under their real names, but their first album, Wednesday Morning, 3 a.m., flopped, just 3,000 copies sold, badly timed amid the British rock invasion. Simon left for England to pursue a solo career, while Garfunkel returned to school. It seemed like the end, until college radio stations in Boston and Florida began playing the original Sound of Silence. Without consulting him, Wilson remixed the song, adding electric instruments to match the era. But the original had timing flaws, and the studio band struggled to keep up. Engineer Roy Haley masked the issues with echo. While Simon was performing in Denmark, he got word the remixed version was charting in the US. When he finally heard it, he was horrified. Paul Simon thought the remixed Sound of Silence sounded messy and awkward, but the public disagreed. By January 1, 1966, it hit number 1 on the Billboard charts, launching Simon and Garfunkel into Southern stardom and forcing them to reunite for a follow-up album, Sounds of Silence. Later that year, they released Parsley, Sage, Rosemary and Thyme, a polished, breakthrough record that stayed on the charts for nearly 3 years and sold over 3 million copies. It was their first time using an 8-track system, allowing them to separate vocals from Simon's guitar and sharpen their sound. Behind the scenes, though, credit disputes began to surface. Songs like Scarborough Fair, a centuries-old folk tune Simon had learned from Martin Carthy, were credited solely to Simon and Garfunkel. Another track, Cloudy, co-written with Bruce Woodley of The Seekers, omitted his name despite compensation. Still, the album was a critical and commercial triumph, later inducted into the Grammy Hall of Fame and ranked among Rolling Stone's greatest albums of all time. That June, the duo performed at the Monterey Pop Festival, holding their own with gentle folk melodies amid explosive acts like Hendrix, Joplin, and The Who. Some thought they weren't edgy enough, but their set reminded the audience of the emotional power of simplicity. That same year, a twist of fate came from director Mike Nichols, who was working on The Graduate and decided to score it with Simon and Garfunkel's music instead of a traditional soundtrack. Though Simon had agreed to write new songs, he was too busy touring, so editors used older tracks like The Sound of Silence and Scarborough Fair. The results were magic. The music and film elevated each other, and Mrs. Robinson, the one new song, won Record of the Year. The movie gave Simon and Garfunkel a broader audience and set a new precedent for using popular music in film. But behind the success, their creative partnership was unraveling. Simon, who wrote every song and shaped the group's sound, grew resentful as Garfunkel, primarily the vocalist, received much of the applause. In interviews and in the 2024 documentary In Restless Dreams, Simon revealed how it stung to watch crowds erupt for Garfunkel's vocals on Bridge Over Troubled Water, a song he had written. That pain wasn't new. It echoed a childhood wound from his mother, who once told him, "You have a good voice, Paul, but Arthur has a fine voice." Over time, Simon's sense of being overlooked deepened. Meanwhile, Garfunkel admitted he had long felt overshadowed. He wanted to write songs but didn't believe his work could match Simon's, so he never even tried during their peak years. In hindsight, both acknowledged the imbalance in their collaboration. Simon made most of the creative decisions, from instrumentation to production, while Garfunkel stayed mostly in the control room. The tipping point came in 1969, when both were cast in Mike Nichols' Catch-22, but Simon's role was cut. As Garfunkel left to film in Mexico, Simon stayed behind in New York, feeling abandoned. Garfunkel promised to return and record albums after 6 months, but Simon refused that arrangement, frustrated by being left to do all the musical heavy lifting. Their attempted long-distance collaboration failed. Simon would send songs, and Garfunkel would send notes, but it never felt the same. As the album Bridge Over Troubled Water neared completion, Garfunkel's absence grew more obvious. On some tracks, he barely appeared, on others, not at all. The Only Living Boy in New York became a veiled farewell, Simon writing to Garfunkel using their old stage names, "Tom, get your plane right on time." The song captured Simon's loneliness and growing emotional distance. Every time they performed Bridge Over Troubled Water live, Simon watched the audience rise for Garfunkel's vocals, all while thinking, "I wrote that song." That bitterness lingered for years. Garfunkel later questioned whether he was the one who broke up the group or if Simon never made space for his ambitions. The truth, they both admitted, was more complicated. Simon drove the music and felt creatively stifled, while Garfunkel felt unseen and creatively limited. Tensions peaked during the bridge sessions, as Garfunkel's film schedule clashed with the album's production. His absence dragged on, Simon grew resentful, and their partnership began to crumble. In the summer of 1970, at Forest Hills Stadium in Queens, just blocks from where their journey began, Paul Simon and Art Garfunkel quietly took the stage for what would become their final concert as a duo. Paul Simon thought the remixed version of The Sound of Silence sounded messy and awkward, but the public couldn't get enough. It soared to number 1 on the Billboard charts by January 1, 1966, catapulting Simon and Garfunkel into instant fame and forcing them back together to record Sounds of Silence. Later that year, they followed up with Parsley, Sage, Rosemary and Thyme, a beautifully polished album that stayed on the charts for nearly 3 years and sold over 3 million copies. This album marked their first use of an 8-track system, allowing for clearer layering of Simon's guitar and their harmonies, resulting in a richer sound. Yet behind the success, tension brewed. Traditional songs like Scarborough Fair, learned from Martin Carthy, were credited only to Simon and Garfunkel, while co-writer Bruce Woodley of The Seekers was left uncredited on Cloudy, despite receiving payment. Still, the album earned critical acclaim, was inducted into the Grammy Hall of Fame, and ranked among Rolling Stone's greatest albums. In June 1967, they performed at the legendary Monterey Pop Festival, standing out with gentle folk melodies amid wild acts like Jimi Hendrix and Janis Joplin, proving simplicity could still captivate. That same year, fate intervened when director Mike Nichols chose Simon and Garfunkel's music for The Graduate instead of a typical score. Although Simon planned to write new songs, touring got in the way, so the film used existing tracks like The Sound of Silence and Scarborough Fair. The combination of film and music was electric, with Mrs. Robinson winning Record of the Year and introducing the duo to a wider, more mature audience, while inspiring a new era of movie soundtracks. But beneath the spotlight, cracks were forming. Simon, who wrote every song and crafted their sound, grew resentful as Garfunkel received much of the applause for his vocals. In the 2024 documentary In Restless Dreams, Simon admits how painful it was to see crowds cheer for Garfunkel's performance of Bridge Over Troubled Water, a song he himself had written. That feeling wasn't new. It echoed a childhood remark from his mother, "You have a good voice, Paul, but Arthur has a fine voice." As their fame rose, Simon felt increasingly overshadowed, while Garfunkel admitted he'd long felt stifled creatively, never attempting to write songs during their peak because he believed he couldn't match Simon. Both later acknowledged their partnership was unbalanced. Simon took charge of the music and production, while Garfunkel mostly stayed in the control room offering feedback. The breaking point came in 1969 when both were cast in Catch-22, but Simon's role was cut. Garfunkel went to film in Mexico, leaving Simon behind in New York, feeling abandoned. Garfunkel promised to return and record albums after 6 months, but Simon rejected the idea, frustrated at carrying the musical load alone. Their long-distance collaboration faltered. Simon sent songs, Garfunkel sent notes, but the spark was gone. As Bridge Over Troubled Water neared completion, Garfunkel's absence was glaring. Some tracks barely featured him, others not at all. The Only Living Boy in New York became a veiled farewell, with Simon singing to Garfunkel as Tom, urging him to get your plane right on time. The song captured Simon's loneliness and emotional distance. Every time they performed Bridge Over Troubled Water live, Simon saw the crowd erupt for Garfunkel's soaring vocals and couldn't help thinking, "I wrote that song." That bitterness stayed with him for years. Garfunkel later wondered whether he was the one who broke up the duo or if Simon never made room for his ambitions. Both agreed the truth was complicated. Simon drove the music but felt creatively boxed in, while Garfunkel felt overshadowed and limited. Tensions peaked during the bridge sessions, as Garfunkel's filming conflicted with the album's production. His prolonged absence fueled Simon's frustration, and their partnership started to crumble. In the summer of 1970, at Forest Hills Stadium in Queens, just blocks from where their story began, Paul Simon and Art Garfunkel quietly took the stage for what would be their final concert as a duo. An engineer later confirmed that every trace of Art Garfunkel's voice was removed from the master tapes of what became Paul Simon's 1983 solo album Hearts and Bones, with Garfunkel's vocals surviving only on rare bootlegs, including a haunting solo on Song About the Moon. This betrayal deepened the rift in their already fragile relationship. By 1993, their attempted reunion in New York quickly fell apart after a critic's dismissive comment referring to Garfunkel as just another collaborator ignited backstage tensions so fierce they almost turned physical. Simon's manager even feared someone might get stabbed. Despite decades of success, the pain and resentment between these two men, who first met as 11-year-old schoolboys singing together in Queens, had only grown stronger. Paul Simon harbored insecurities, notably about his height, which Garfunkel once teased mercilessly, a wound Simon never forgot and later explored in therapy. Garfunkel himself admitted that part of his early friendship was born from pity for Simon's stature, a compensation that Simon felt created a deep power imbalance. Simon wrote the songs, Garfunkel sang them, but the public often saw Garfunkel as the star. Their manager recalled Simon's bitterness when crowds cheered wildly for Garfunkel's voice on songs Simon had written. Yet their shared history, from a $25 single in 1957 to global superstardom by 1970, kept them intertwined despite the mounting tension. Early on, cracks showed. Simon secretly recorded solo material in 1958 without telling Garfunkel, a betrayal that lingered painfully for decades. Their split was never just professional, it was deeply personal, marked by unresolved wounds and mutual blame. Garfunkel questioned whether he or Simon was responsible for their breakup, lamenting how he was often seen as merely Simon's voice rather than an equal partner. He admitted he sometimes hurt Simon intentionally. Simon, resigned, believed their split was inevitable, telling interviewers, "Duos don't stay together," comparing their fallout to legendary pairs like Lennon and McCartney or the Everly Brothers, and emphasizing that reunions were not about the music, it's about the business. They did reunite occasionally. Their 1981 Central Park concert drew over 500,000 fans, but by 2016, Simon bluntly admitted, "We don't get along. It's not fun." When their final tour in 2010 was cancelled due to Garfunkel's vocal issues, Simon saw it as the last straw. "He let us all down. I didn't feel I could trust him anymore." Ultimately, their story is one of brilliance, beauty, and bitterness. Two boys from Queens who changed music history but could never outrun the pain of growing up and growing apart.